Senior U.S. District Court Judge Dan Polster recently made history as the presiding judge in a series of federal lawsuits against opioid manufacturers and distributors. He talks about one of his proudest accomplishments in those cases as he shared his legacy on the bench and as a dedicated volunteer at the CMBA. Judge Polster also gives us a first-hand account of the earliest days of the 3 R's program, teaching rights, responsibilities, and realities to Cleveland high school students and the Stokes Scholars, helping college students through scholarships and mentoring. The judge even shares the reason he's on the bench in the federal court instead of in the dugout. Here is Judge Dan Polster sharing his living legacy.
I am Dan Polster. I'm a CMBA member and have been so for probably about 45 years, give or take.
I love it. So tell me a little bit about your pathway into law. When did you know that going to law school was something that you really wanted to do?
You want the truth answer?
I do.
All right. This is a true story. Most people don't believe it. As a kid, growing up in Cleveland, all I wanted to be was a baseball player. I am sure, Becky, that my folks knew at about 6 months they had not produced a major leaguer. I was overweight, uncoordinated, nearsighted. But they figured this is a harmless dream. I would take my bat, ball, and glove up to the playground by our school every day and play, kept my statistics, whatever, and this was what I wanted to be. In 6th grade in Little League, who was our coach? Al Rosen, Hall of Fame Cleveland Indians third baseman. Why is he our coach? Well, his son was on the team, so he's the dad, he's the coach. So one day he said, guys, I'm going to teach you how to hit a curveball. So these were just slow, easy curves, not splitters or what they're throwing now. So I saw my friends go up to bat. I watched the ball. I could see what it was doing. Said, I can do this. I get up there. I could not make myself swing where I knew the ball would end up. I kept swinging where it started. I did not come within a yard of hitting the ball. I came home, came into the house, threw my glove down and said to my mom, I guess I'm going to have to be a lawyer. It's honest to God happened, okay? And I guess this was my plan B, that maybe in the back of my mind I said, maybe I won't be a ball player. So that was it. I decided to be a lawyer. And I don't know. I mean, I think it was from maybe some TV shows. I remember everyone watched Perry Mason, but I watched The Defenders with E.B. Marshall, because they had interesting cases and they often lost. But I thought that would be a pretty neat thing to do. So that's really it. It was in 6th grade I decided to be a lawyer.
Well, you anticipated my question. I can't quite figure out why law would have been the fallback to superstar major league ball player, but TV is quite an influencer.
Yeah, I just thought they were doing really important things and helping to change society, make the world better. So I thought, well, that's what I like to do.
Now, was there ever a time that you flirted with a deviation from law?
Sort of, because when I was finishing college in the early 70s, law school, if you didn't know what you wanted to do, everyone said, go to law school. Everyone was going to law school, everyone. And I suddenly looked around and said, geez, is this something I just seized on when I couldn't hit Al Rosen's curveball? And maybe I should think about this. So I took a year off between college and law school. Almost no one did it then. Of course, if you had a gap, you went to the Vietnam. But fortunately, I had a high number, and I also had childhood asthma. So I was 1Y, fit for emergency duty only. So I could take a year off. I did something law-related. I liked it. So I said, I really do want to be a lawyer. And it made a big difference that I really decided as an adult, not as a 6th grader, that this is what I wanted to do.
So talk to me a little bit about your law school experience. You know, there are those who go to law school who fall in love with being in law school. There are those who sort of grit their teeth just to get through it and get out to the other side so they can get to practice. And then there's some that are somewhere in the middle. So what was your experience like?
Well, I did fall in love, but not with law school, with my future wife, who we met the first week. That's far and away the best part of law school. The rest is sort of so-so.
Well, you know, I have to ask you, how did you meet the
We
lovely
met, and we
Deb?
met at a party, a mutual friend of ours who we both knew in college. We didn't know each other at college, although we were at the same place, had a party, and we met, it was the first week. So um, the rest of law school was, it was not a very friendly environment. Um, Sort of like boot camp. I was never in the military service, but it was sort of break you down to build you up. I did come out with a desire to do, government or public service. I went in with that. There was at the time a pretty heavy socialization to do corporate law, but I think because I took a year off, I was able to resist that, and I was fortunate enough to get a job with the government right out.
So talk to us a little bit about the beginning of your career with the government, what that first job was like, and whether there were any particular individuals maybe who influenced you or mentored you as you got started.
Well, see, I was lucky enough to get a job with the Department of Justice Antitrust Division in Cleveland. It was a real fine group of men and women. We were up against some of the best lawyers in the city and in the country. I remember as a practically newly minted lawyer going up against Dick Pogue, who, it is hard to believe now, he was the managing partner of Jones Day and a full-time antitrust litigator. And he did both. I don't know how he did it. I do not know how he did it,
He
but he
clearly never
did both.
slept.
He could not have slept, but he did both. And I've told him he made me a much better lawyer, having to go up against him in my, middle 20s.
So at what point did the concept of moving into a role that saw you on the bench come to
People have
play?
always asked me that, and I don't know if there was a specific time. I mean, obviously, I was in court a lot. After 5.5 years, I transitioned to the U.S. Attorney's Office, so I was in court a lot. I knew all the federal judges. At some point, I got into my mind that maybe I could do this job and that I would like to do it. And of course, I was always interested in public service. Um, People kept saying, well, when are you going to leave government? When you're going to leave government? And at a certain point, they stopped asking because I was there and I clearly liked it. But I thought, well, maybe I could be a judge. It was the longest of long shots. And the first time I tried, I didn't know what I was doing. But like anything else, you learn from your mistakes. And the second time, I knew what I was doing. I was still a real long shot, but at least I went about it in a more planful way and a whole lot of luck. Any judge, any federal judge who can look you in the eye and say there wasn't a tremendous amount of luck in his or her appointment is candidly not telling the truth.
Well, with all due respect, there may be some luck into it, but there's also a whole lot of credibility that you bring from the work that you did.
Well, but there were many people who had
For
that,
sure.
Becky. Okay,
I
that's
understand.
the point.
Yeah. Right place, right time,
You got to
right
be right
combination of
place,
experiences.
and to become a federal judge, either you yourself has to have a whole lot of political capital, or you need friends who do. For me, it was the latter. It was the friends, for sure.
Fair enough. Well, let's explore a little more about the Friends. So at some point, the Bar Association became an organization, and not just the Cleveland Bar, but other organizations that you got involved in. So let's talk a little bit about bar associations in your life.
Well, I think I joined the Federal Bar and the Cleveland Bar around the same time. I mean, the Federal Bar Association back then, and we're talking about the mid-70s. I started practicing in 1976. The federal government was small, and the Federal Bar Association was largely lawyers who practiced, were federal government lawyers. They made up 80% of the Bar Association. Well, that was me. So there were a number of people in the antitrust division. They said, hey, you should join the Federal Bar. So Federal Bar. I think Deborah joined the Cleveland Bar Association a little before I did, but she joined, and I figured, well, I should probably join that too. Why not? And so I joined that also. I just thought, well, I'm a lawyer here. It's a way to meet people. It's like a good thing to do, so I did.
I do know that there came a point in time where you started to really show your passion and commitment for supporting the next generation of professionals who are coming up through the ranks of not just law school, but even earlier than law school. the 3Rs program, which we launched almost 20 years ago, which is amazing to believe. And then over the last few years, we've moved in since 2012 into the Stokes Scholars program. Talk a little bit about how you got connected to the students and why it was important for you to get involved with them.
Well, at some point, I guess when I became middle-aged, well, let's say how old I am now. I'm almost 71. The next generation became a lot more important. I guess you become a parent and you start thinking of those things. And, Hugh McKay came up with this idea of 3Rs. I knew Hugh. And I thought, well, this is great because this is our future. And back then, things weren't great in the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. We'll just leave it at that. And a lot of people said, it's a total lost cause. Forget it. I said, you cannot forget. This is our future. Cleveland has no future without these young men and women. And I thought it was a great program. So I volunteered and I talked to people in my chambers and they said, yeah, it sounds great. So we've been doing it from the very beginning. And I look forward to it.
Tell me what you get out of it. So clearly, you've got a full schedule. You've got a very full life. The fact that you continue all these years later to invest your time personally, as well as your office's time, why is it so important to you?
Well, first, as I said, this is our future, our city's future. I grew up here. My family goes back many generations in Cleveland. And we may be the last because I've got 3 wonderful adult children. None of them live here. But, the point is this is where I've grown up. My family's grown up. Some of these kids have not gotten the breaks that I have. That's the reality. It's important that they care, that they have a future, but they know that some adults care about them and care about their future. So it really is 2 things. We're in there to try and help further their education, rights, responsibilities, realities, so they understand about the government, the Constitution, the laws, their rights, but also that there are some people in town, adults, maybe some people have some important responsibilities that care about them and want them to have a future. And we talk about that, said you'll have a future, but you've got to help make it happen. So it's both. And, you never know when you're saying something what resonates or when it resonates. And I hope that over the last 20 years, some of those young men and women, maybe something sunk in, and at least the part that they can have a future, maybe a better future than their parents had, all right, if they make it happen. I'm going to tell you, Becky, I have complimented many presidents who've succeeded Hugh, because the thing is, you come in, I've been, president or chairman of organizations, you come in, you say, this is what I want to do. I want to put my stamp on the organization. Sometimes the best thing you can do is if the organization is doing something good, you make sure it keeps going and becomes institutionalized. And that's what happened with 3Rs. Succeeding bar presidents could have said, yeah, it's Hugh McKay's idea. We've done it, let's. They didn't. They saw it was good and stayed on it and actually made it better.
You bet, you bet.
So,
and then expanded it into a college-based program, which is what the Lewis Stokes Scholars program is.
Well, that's near and dear to my heart because my first public sector job was fresh out of high school working for Congressman Stokes. Now, how did this happen? I grew up with his oldest daughter, Shelley. She was in my class at Ludlow School. And my folks knew Congressman Stokes. And I just graduated from high school in '69, and I didn't have a summer job. And my dad said, well, why don't you just go down in his office and volunteer? So I took the Rapid downtown and I walked in the June of '69 and I said, here I am. I just graduated from high school. Do you have anything for me to do? And they weren't sure what to do with me exactly. So they sat me down at a desk and I talked to people. And a couple days later, Arnold Pinckney, who was the administrative officer in charge of the Cleveland office, and this was Congressman Stokes' very first year in office. He had just been elected in November of '68, so he'd been in office 6 months. Arnold came in and said, hey, Dan, You just graduated from high school. I've been asked to give a high school graduation speech. Why don't you write down a few things? I'd never written a speech in my life, so I pulled, there are no word. I pulled out a legal pad, wrote some stuff down in longhand, handed it to him. He went off, came back a few hours later, said, "Hey, I like the speech. You're hired." So I got hired, and not to write speeches, but I did constituent assistance, and I understood that what people really cared about from a congressperson was not the speeches or the legislation, but if they had a problem with the federal government, they went to their congressperson and he or she took care of it. That's what really resonated, and so that's what I helped doing. And Congressman Stokes went on, was congressman for 30 years. He always treated people with respect, no matter who they were. He worked very hard and was a real model. So, to have this program and to encourage people to come in and, see, law-related jobs. I mean, we want, I've always said the day that our profession doesn't look like our country, profession in the bench, we're in deep trouble. So we want kids who graduate from Cleveland Metropolitan School District, all races, to become lawyers. And some of those graduates have, and I've known them. Some have practiced in front of me. So it's really great to give those kids a little bit of encouragement.
Well, I was going to say that early exposure to Congressman Stokes and seeing how he and his office treated everyone with dignity, with respect, with a seriousness, I can tell you that I've seen you do that. And you asked the question, you don't know whether anything sunk in. One of the high points that we hear on a regular basis, both from our 3 R's kids and the Stokes Scholars, is the opportunity to come here to the federal courthouse, to spend time with you one-on-one, to come into your courtroom, and to hear your words of both inspiration and also practicality that really resonates with them. So I've got just legions of Judge Polster fans out there who have definitely heard what you said, whether they go into law or not. The fact that you have invested that kind of time and been generous in how you've talked to them, and frankly, you've talked to them like adults, right? That really resonates. That
I
really
tried.
matters.
Thank you. I have learned. Look, I've raised three teenagers, now adults, and what I learned is, you talk to a teenager as if they're a little kid, they will tune out immediately. You treat them like a grown-up, 9 times out of 10, that's where they'll go. I mean, I remember when I was a teenager. I mean, I first, my teachers treated me almost, like a grown-up. I responded. If they treated me like a little kid, forget it. Who wants to be a kid? And so kids are doing now in high school things light years beyond anything I did. And but also for some people, judges are, they think we're mean, scary people. I mean, for a whole lot of people, coming to court means you've done something bad or someone you knew or loved did something bad. All right? And I want them to know, all right, yes, if someone's charged with a crime, this is what happens. But judges aren't mean, scary people. They're just, as I said, an ordinary person with an extraordinary job, and we care about people. And yes, sometimes we have to deal with some serious crimes, but that isn't all we do. And I want them to understand that, because court, it's their court. I mean, it's not my courtroom, his beautiful courtroom. I don't own it. I'm like a steward. And my hope is that when I finally retire, that I can say that I've passed on our court system of justice, a little bit stronger than when I got it. And then the next person will take it the next step. That's the idea.
There is no question that our community is in your debt for the service and the view that you've brought to how you managed your courtroom day in and day out. No question. So I'm curious, you've been on the bench a long time. I'm curious about how have things changed? How have litigants changed as they've come before you? What sort of big picture, how are things different in your courtroom today than they were 20, 30 years ago?
Well, it's a very good question, and it's interesting to me to, in my mind's eye, I'm still a young judge. Obviously, I'm not. And I still haven't fully grasped like having a senior connected to me. All right. But that's the reality. So we have far fewer trials, particularly civil trials, than we did when I started. There are good reasons for it, maybe some negative reasons. So we are much more sort of case managers, moving litigation along, settling it, resolving it, rather than necessarily trying it. One thing that certainly has changed is the exponential growth of multi-district litigation, which was really pretty embryonic 24 years ago when I became a judge. Now, of course, I have probably the most notorious one in the country, maybe the most challenging, but there are lots of these big multi-district litigations. I think, believe it or not, 2/3 of the entire federal civil caseload is in a multi-district litigation in terms of numbers of numerical cases by number. So that has been a big change. That we're doing more and more of those. Our court has done a lot of them. Judge O'Malley was the first person on our court, Kate O'Malley, and I think a lot of us saw that, and she encouraged us to do it, so we did. Our bench is a lot more diverse. Okay, you know, I tell young people, guess what? Until 1980, so the first 130 years of our court, 1853 or so to 1980, 100% white men. The same day in 1980, President Carter appointed George White and Ann Aldrich, our first African American and first female federal jurist. So it's only 40 years that there's been any diversity. Well, we have a lot of it now. So that has changed and evolved, and right. So when I became a lawyer, 1976, the whole history of the federal court, Northern District of Ohio, all white men. So that's been a big change and certainly a real positive one.
Yeah, dramatic change for sure. What about the state of collegiality and professionalism? What do you see among the lawyers who practice in your courtroom today compared to years ago?
I still think it's pretty good, but it's challenging. The fact is, what I've heard from my colleagues in private practice, law is a lot more of a business than it was a profession, and that's the reality. People move around a lot. They change firms. Bringing in business is a lot more important. There's not, you know, there isn't the loyalty, the longevity. So civil litigation can be, you know, pretty fractious. I still feel that in Cleveland it's better than in a lot of other places, because while we have, you know, it's the legal community is large enough to do the most cutting edge work in the country, it's small enough that you can't hide a bad reputation. So what goes around comes around. And so I think it's still a pretty good place to practice law. I worry about civility. You know, we don't live in our own microcosm. We're affected by the society. Candidly, you know, the last few years, I think we've all become a little less tolerant and collegial than we were. I don't think it's good. I feel it in myself. I'm not proud of it. I think lawyers need to model it. All right, if certain people around that you see are not acting that way, in my view, that's not an excuse to model that. It's the opposite. We each have to step up and say, hey, we know how to act. We're supposed to model it for others. It's not easy. It's not easy, but I think actually that may be the most important thing I do as a judge. You know, litigation's a full contact sport. People can get worked up. I got worked up as a litigant sometimes. The judge isn't supposed to throw gasoline on the fire. I'm the one who's supposed to be in control. All right? If I'm in control, things can calm down. If I'm not, we got a bonfire. So that's really my job on the bench, to make sure. And you can usually, if someone is starting to get out of line, just a quick reminder is the best way. You don't come down with a sledgehammer. You just make a quick reminder, and that usually does it. So that's what I try to do.
So as a litigator for 20-ish years before I joined the staff of the Bar Association, one of the things that I used the Bar Association for was to get to meet people outside of my day-to-day life, outside of my firm where I worked, outside of the usual suspects against whom I was litigating, and building those kinds of out-of-the-office relationships, I think, are an essential piece. They're not the only answer, but an essential piece to some of
Bar
what you're talking about.
associations, Inn of Court, I'm in a William K. Thomas Inn of Court. Opportunities for lawyers to be with lawyers and with judges is good. And I think it's good for lawyers to, get to know judges, and judges to get to know lawyers, and particularly federal court, because it can be a very lonely job. It's a plus that we don't have to run for office. But the downside is we don't have to go and see anyone either. And this is a wonderful building, but it's very isolating. I mean, it was built with security in mind. Well, that means there's less freedom. We're behind all sorts of closed doors and security and locks and everything. And so as a federal judge, if I don't get out into the community, I may not see anyone. And that isn't good. So it's not good for a judge. We need to, know lawyers. We need to hear from them. If you see enough people, if you're not doing something the way it should be done, it'll probably come to your attention in maybe an indirect way, and that's good, because we need to get honest feedback, and we don't get a lot of honest feedback as a judges. Yes, Your Honor. Yes, Your Honor. And all that. So I think the more we get out in the community, one way or another, we'll get some feedback, and that's important.
So when you think about the Bar Association in a bigger picture way, what do you think the legacy of our Cleveland Bar is in this community?
I think it has helped make our profession better. I think it's brought lawyers together. It's reminded us that it's a privilege to be a lawyer, right? We've got a pretty important responsibility. I mean, upholding, the rule of law, I say this to new citizens. The rule of law is what makes us a country. Everyone says, well, capitalism. Well, guess what? Without the predictability and certainty of the rule of law, there'd be no capitalism. Who's investing in Syria right now? And, we're the ones who make it work, make that justice system work for people. And I think the Bar Association reminds us of that. You look at any organization, any civic organization, and you'll see one or more lawyers on the board. That's not by accident. We're problem solvers, and people turn to us to help make things better. And I think the Bar Association reminds us that that's one of the things we should do. Yes, we're earning a living, supporting our family, of course, building a career, but there's an important civic component to being a lawyer, and I think the Bar Association both reminds us of it and gives us vehicles to fulfill it.
Well, we're fortunate. I've said it before. I've practiced the bulk of my career here in Cleveland, but for a while I was traveling to other jurisdictions. And I've said it before, and I'll keep saying it. I really believe that we have the most generous legal community anywhere in terms of the number of hours and the genuine commitment that people have to investing back into the civic arena here in this. And you're a perfect example of exactly that. When you reflect on your career, you've held a lot of different roles. You've had many, many, both public high points and I'm guessing some personal high points. Is there anything that stands out for you as one of the accomplishments in your career that you are most proud of?
There's something I've done in this opioid MDL. This has been the hardest thing professionally by orders of magnitude. And I've done some things well and made plenty of mistakes, tried to learn from them. And taken a fair number of punches. Sometimes I feel like Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier in there. You know, if you be a federal judge, you got to be able to take a punch. Okay, it's not a job for sissies. At the very beginning, when I learned that among the, I've got 3,000 cases, all right, that I'm overseeing. There were several hundred brought by Native American tribes because Native Americans have been affected maybe the absolute worst by the opioid crisis. I said publicly, I don't know if there are ever going to be any global settlements, but if there are, the Native American tribes are going to be included, or else I'm not signing off on them. And I was thinking, darn it, I'm not going to be the latest chapter in the federal government screwing over Native Americans. It's gone on for 100 years. It's not going to be on me. And I really meant it. And just a few more settlements that were announced yesterday, if they go through, I mean, even the ones that have gone through already, the Native American tribes are getting about $1 billion over, the next 10 or 15 years, about 3%. So at least they can say that this time they got a fair shake. So
that's quite a legacy, Judge Polster.
Well, I mean, it doesn't make up for hundreds of years. I mean, you can't change the past, but all any of us can do is do the right thing right now. So at least in that respect, I think I did the right thing right now.
Thank you, Judge Polster, for
Thank
being
you.
so generous of your time and your insights, and what a legacy you're leaving to this community. Thanks for all the great work.
Well, I hope I'm not done.
Oh, you're long from done. We
Well,
both know you're a long
hope,
way from done. You still got a lot more to go.
Well, I hope so. I
Yeah.
hope so. I mean, that's,
We're counting on it. 71
right.
is young. My father, I remember my father at about age maybe 78, 79, he was telling me he would get up in the morning, he'd look in the mirror, and he'd say, who is this guy looking back at me? Like, in my head, I'm still like, 45, 46.
That's the way, I think what I've always felt, Becky, if you can combine that can-do attitude, that sense of invincibility that we all had in our 20s, with sort of the wisdom that you get when you're older, you can really do things. Because, I mean, at my age, I am largely indestructible. I mean, if something happens to me, it happens to me. I've had a long life. My children are no longer dependent on me, all right? They've launched, they've got families, I mean, now's the time, and too often people my age, they get tired, they think there's not, whatever. Heck, now's the time when we can really do something. So that's how I view things, and
Keep on doing it.
No one knows how they're going to age, but
True.
I figure, as long as I've got it, I'll use it.
Amen. Judge Polster, thank you for being a shining example to our community through your actions to protect the rule of law and your career-long dedication to volunteering. Now you can help us celebrate our 150th anniversary with Legacy 150 throughout 2023. Just visit clemetrobar.org/Legacy 150 to get involved. Let's hear from you today.